So let me just read the script real quick. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, GL 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Medfield Warrant Committee is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. As a reminder, persons who would like to listen or view this meeting while in progress may do so by following the instructions on the agenda and meeting notice. And we are being recorded for pleasure. I am Sharon Tatro, and we will do a quick roll call. So Ed.
I am Ed Bozella.
Christine.
Christine Barton.
Amanda.
Amanda Hall.
Bob.
Bob Slaney.
Jeremy.
Jeremy Marcette.
And Newton.
Newton Thompson.
All righty. So in light of the fact that I have been a little underwater today, I'm going to turn it right over to Christine and Nick so they can talk about the stuff they sent and where we're at. You're on mute, Christine, though.
My first Zoom, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, this minute.
I'm doing it from home, so I'm trying to, not have you listen to my dogs. And then last Thursday, my dog was barking at Sharon's dog, which couldn't be more 2021 than that. So anyway, okay. I'm going to walk through a couple of things because I think on Thursday's meeting, I heard two things. So let me get through this and then I'll take some questions, but make sure you have the new free cash sheet that I sent today. So I think at Thursday's meeting, there was some confusion and I think we were trying to do too much in a half an hour before we went into the warrant hearing. And we did not give you enough background on where we were. So I want to change that. So we heard two things. One, Bob, I think I heard a concern from you that we were tying our hands and we would not have enough free cash on hand for fiscal year 23. So I heard those concerns from you. Ed, I still think that I have confused you about the $689,000 in the unanticipated state aid and where that is. So that is completely on us. And I want to explain why we're having you look at this in a different way tonight. So about a month ago, when we were very close to getting this down, I think our delta in the budget was about $421,274, give or take a dollar there. The selectmen made it clear that they did not want to use free cash to balance the budget. They've been saying that from, the last 3 years, and they were very consistent with that again this year. But they were open as we were getting this number down to using that free cash and then obviously using the ARPA funds if we are able to do that as well. So one of the things that Sharon and I started looking at, and this is back to Sharon's purple spreadsheet, is if we were going to use that much free cash, how do we meet the reserve policy and the free cash policy? And in doing that, we incorporated that $689,000 of unanticipated state aid, we're calling it. We use that as part of our reserves in looking at that calculation. And it's similar to how we did it in 2018. I've had a conversation with the Board of Selectmen, and you're not going to be surprised to find out that they don't want us to do it that way. There's nothing in the free cash reserve policy that precludes us from doing it that way. There is no date on when you can look at your free cash, but I would not be surprised, and I might be ruining this for you, but very shortly after town meeting, there's going to be a change to the reserve policy to ensure that we don't use that.
I don't like my purple spreadsheet.
They did not like your purple spreadsheet. And part of that is because even though we know that $689,000 is guaranteed for free cash at the close on June 30th, it isn't something we should be counting on in our reserves. So if you look at the new free cash spreadsheet that we sent out today, I just want to walk through it to get everybody on the same page, because after I talked to Sharon Thursday night, after what we heard, at least what I think I heard at the meeting, I had a conversation with several of the selectmen about how we could move forward with this. Because I have a concern that tomorrow night there was going to be a discussion by the Board of Selectmen that that was not okay, that even though the policy didn't allow us to do it, they didn't want us to continue in that fashion. So I didn't really give Nick the weekend off, to be honest, and we spent a lot of time thinking about this and working on this. And we went back and looked at anywhere in the budget, which we started developing last fall, anywhere in the budget that we had really built in what I'm calling a COVID budget. So one of the things that we had anticipated having a problem in balancing the budget, that we would have more layoffs on the town side and the school side. We aren't laying anybody off on the town side based on this budget. So I feel comfortable reducing the line item for unemployment. I also feel comfortable reducing, as you know, we carry money for our snow and ice deficit. We carry $100,000 and the deficit is currently around $50,000. So I feel comfortable in reducing that appropriation. So we will cut $100,000 from the budget. Now, when it snows next week, we will be 100% to blame. So just putting that out there. Mo was not thrilled with me because it's pretty much a guarantee it's going to be some freak storm. But anyway, walking through this.
That's not, Christine, just to be clear, that's not really the appropriation, and that you're meeting the DOR's requirement that it's the appropriation is the same or increases each year. This is your deficit coverage. So you're still in compliance with the DOR as far as snow and ice.
Absolutely. And this year we had carried 100,000. If you'll remember last year, we had such a light snow year, we were able to eliminate that altogether, but we did incur $42,000 over that. But yes, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so let's walk through fiscal year 22 free cash. So right now we're planning on using $751,000 to create the capital stabilization fund. We have a 10% increase for OPEB, which is $42,500. And we are recommending a $500,000 transfer to the general stabilization. Now, those three things make up what we didn't do last year. So we were asking, this was the part of the financial policy we didn't meet last year that we have made it clear to the selectmen we would try and fix going forward for this year. Reducing the $100,000 between snow and ice and unemployment brings that deficit in the balance to $214,393. So your total free cash for this budget is basically 1.5. We know in fiscal year 20, we had a certified free cash of 3.3. This is Bob, this is where I'm getting to your concern. So we are using the 1.5, that leaves us with unappropriated free cash amount of 1.8. Okay. So the general fund stabilization balance, September 30th of 20, is 1.6. We're going to transfer the 500 in, and our new stabilization fund balance will be the 2.19. Nick went over last week our general fund expenditures, which is 65.7. So then if you look at doing the 2.5% total annual expenditures, if you're looking at that unappropriated free cash we have on hand, the 1.8. 1.6 is the 2.5% test. So that actually provides us with $206,000 in excess. Now, I have had a conversation with one of the selectmen today that they are going to move to transfer $200,000 into that as well. So they're looking at a total of a $700,000 transfer to stabilization. Now, that leaves us with 1.849232 as unappropriated free cash. That will go back into being certified in the fall. So I think, Bob, that gets at your concern that we would not have enough free cash for the fiscal year 23 budget. Okay, if you move down to the financial policy for reserves total, so the current reserves is the 4.9. So right now we are at 7.53. We want to meet the expenditure test of the 7.5%. So that leaves us, we're slightly over it with 21,584. Now, what's going to happen is that 1.849232 that is unappropriated, okay, that disappears as of June 30th and needs to be recertified in the fall. We know we have that money on hand. We know we have the 689,000 coming back to us on June 30th. In addition, there will be, we can anticipate some turn back. So I think it'll be a little tighter after what we did cutting the budgets last year, as well as any unanticipated revenue in terms of local receipts. So I think that addresses the issue of what you'll have on hand that'll be certified again this fall to start the fiscal year 23 budget process. And I think you can meet all of these tests now by cutting that 100,000 without having to count on that 689, which I think is more appropriate and what you're going to see the selectmen talk about tomorrow evening. So I know that was a lot. I just threw at you in a very short amount of time. So let me know if there are any specific questions and we can go over it in a little more detail.
Where was the, I'm sorry, about the additional $200,000 transfer to stabilization? That was from, where was the source of that?
So we'll have, that'll be from
Excess?
free cash. So if you do the 2.5% expenditure free cash test, we actually have 206 over the 2.5%. So the selectmen would like to take that 200 in combination with the 500 and put it into stabilization. Now, one of the reasons why I don't think we gave we gave you an answer last week as to why we should do that. And I think Jeremy was able to answer some of it. And what I think we really need to stress is that this is a one-time opportunity for us to be able to do this. So it's not normal for us to have 3.3 million in free cash. And we know that was due to the pandemic. We did a budget freeze. We didn't do our hirings. We had, staff issues in the police department that we weren't able to fill. So that's not going to happen again and shouldn't happen again to have that much on hand. And I don't anticipate that. So I don't think it's inappropriate to move that 700,000 to the general stabilization. I think it meets our concerns with Moody's. We're building up our reserves and then we're moving forward. And I don't think it impacts the ability you'll have to fund some of those projects that we've been talking about next year with free cash.
Oh, I agree with what Christine said. I mean, one of the things that I had said to her, I think that now is a little bit of a seize the moment kind of situation, in that we know that the other things we used to have for reserves, like that school account, is going to be gone. So we have an opportunity right now to put 700,000 in. We know there's probably at least 700,000 coming out because we've got the state aid piece, the 680 plus whatever. So chances are certified free cash is going to be at least 2.5 million. And so I feel good about that because I think we're going to go into next year with not being in a position where we're going to be afraid that we can't do the basics of the financial plan of putting another 200,000 in stabilization and doing the OPEB and, maybe being able to use more to put in to capital again. I just think we'll be able to have options. So, and having picked up $700,000 and put it into this long-term savings account, if you will, I think it would move us well as a town to be able to do that.
Sharon, I agree with that. This is Newton. And I just understand what the Board of Selectmen were concerned about in that 680,000. It's not that it's not going to come to free cash. They just didn't want to do it in a anticipatory fashion. Is that the gist of it? They wanted to actually have it hit.
Yes, even though we know it's a guarantee, and it's an odd situation in how it's coming to us based on some decisions we made last year. It's not something they think when we're doing the reserve policy, we should be looking at what's coming anticipated. It should be what has been certified and is on hand.
Yes. I have a really basic question. Can you help me out with the timeframes of free cash? For example, we have a certified number for FY 2020. Was that done as of July 1, 2020?
So it happens in the fall. Certification is in the fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a point in
Is
time
it-
like November 1st or something like that?
So the books close June 30th. So it's everything you have on hand then. That's why the turnbacks, everything's included. And then Joy does her work and it's usually certified. We try to have it in the October November timeframe.
But the
Okay.
date they're certifying it as of is July 1st,
As of
right?
July, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So everything that we're looking forward into 2020, we're saying that unappropriated free cash of 1.849 million would be as of 7/1/22.
21,
Okay.
right? 21.
This is where it gets confusing when we say fiscal year 22. It's really still 21.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
All right.
could-
it's because we're talking like it was, yeah.
It's your
So-
21, it's your fiscal year 21 certified free cash that you are certifying in the fall. You'll have that number in the fall.
Okay, so that's our beginning balance for FY22.
Yes. Even
Thank
though,
you.
yes.
But you're using it, yes, but you're gonna be using it in fiscal year 23. Because we'll be in fiscal 22.
Just stop talking, Christine.
Okay.
So I'm gonna just for my, I'm gonna ask an elementary question. We have free cash.
Uh-huh.
We have reserves, and we have stabilization. Three different categories.
The big reserves is free cash plus stabilization together.
Plus some of the others. Nick can
Plus-
pull up the full
That's what I
reserve.
said.
Yeah.
I'm really asking this to be very basic. I'm trying to.
I think reserves is everything the town has in reserves. One
Right.
piece of reserves is free cash, one piece is stabilization, and then there's like a half a dozen other little dribbly accounts that
Yeah.
are savings that Nick could.
Okay, so stabilization is primarily the capital stabilization fund and the building?
Well, there's multiple ones. So there's municipal stabilization fund. There's now going to be a capital stabilization fund, and then there's just the general stabilization fund.
But for our purposes, it's only general stabilization.
The one that the one we're talking about right now is the general stabilization
Right.
fund. This is the
Municipal
pot where
bill-
we say, in order to get the money out, if the world came crashing down and we had to do something, we needed $1 million desperately. If we wanted to go to the town, if we were going to ask to use $1 million out of free cash, it's a majority vote. If we want the $1 million out of stabilization, it's 2/3.
Yeah, no, okay, that's helpful. Like if something happened, like a worldwide pandemic, for example, maybe.
Yeah, like that.
Say,
Yeah.
what if? A what if? Let's use a what if. Okay.
But if there was a pandemic and there was
What are
not a
the odds,
CARES Act,
right? No,
Yeah.
but okay, so no, that's
Yeah.
helpful. But
Yeah.
I guess the point I'm trying to get to is, I'm not that concerned about moving the pieces around. That's, I understand it, and I think that it's reflecting conservative numbers and it's in compliance with policy. But you had a spoiler alert that the policy is going to change.
Well, I think right now there's no date for when, so it allows us to use that anticipated free cash. So we could have used that 689 to meet our reserves because we know we're going to have that on hand on June 30th. I think what you're going to see is the selectmen change that policy and put in a test that it's prior to that. So you're not counting on something coming back in. It's what you have on hand at the time.
which
Right.
is why, like, if
Which
you took the spreadsheet that Nick and Christine sent us last week and put it side by side with this one,
I did.
the amount that we would have had extra rather than that couple 100,000 was like $1 million. And the reason why it was so much higher was because we were adding in the 680 already. So now that we've taken the 680 out, we're down to this like $200,000 number. It's almost like they don't want us to be able to say, oh, we know we have 680 coming, so let's use that to meet our policies. And then we would have potentially transferred even more into stabilization that we didn't have yet.
This sounds
Basically-
familiar, Sharon.
It's
We did
basically
this one year,
spending
right?
you're spending your IRS refund before you actually get it.
Right, so
Right.
they just
Did
want to
that,
make
a
sure
couple
that you
years
have
ago.
the money in the bank basically
did.
before you
Yeah.
spend it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I mean, and we weren't gonna spend it anyway. We were just gonna
Right.
account for it in a different place.
We
but-
did do it like 3 years ago, the first, Christine's first budget.
No, I remember
And,
that.
and when I got the fake flu, the fake warrant
That was
flu,
That was
we
pulled the
did
rabbit out
do,
of the hat. Yeah.
yes,
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, that's when the financial team inherited a budget in, February 1st.
Yeah, that's, yeah, right. I mean,
right.
this is all
Yeah.
progress, so don't get me wrong, but I'm just
Right.
trying to understand. And one of the things I want to understand is how do we help the Joe taxpayer and Jan taxpayer understand this? Because, as we are moving forward in this, with all these different pieces that are pressure on our costs and on our planning and on our financing for the water and sewer and school. Like someone made reference to in one of the conversations with the school committee, they made reference to the rainy day fund. I'm just using that as an example that there's not a clear understanding. And I fall into that category, and I'm sitting here doing it every week in terms of what are these categories and why do we achieve it? So if somebody says, you're raising my taxes and look at all this money you got. And you know what I'm saying? Does it make sense?
Well, I think one of the things we've tried to tell people is that by not putting this money into stabilization, which people refer to as the rainy day fund, by not doing that, we are threatening our bond rating. And that in turn will make anything we borrow, whether it's the treatment plant, the new school, any projects we have coming down, more expensive to the taxpayer. So
No, I totally agree, and I understand that distinction, and I think that can be explained.
Mhm. I mean, I wish the DOR in their infinite wisdom years ago never called this free cash, because I think that gives you the impression that it's just cash available,
Well, yeah, right. And
everything.
it's on top of this
Right.
stabilization, which is the reserve. So,
Right.
what's the difference so if you look at the stabilization and look at free cash,
Mhm.
what do you tell Joe, the taxpayer, the differences of the two are? I mean,
So I think-
why do we have 2 million in this and we're gonna put 200,000 in that? And I'm trying to understand,
I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? Maybe Ed could articulate it better. I'm not sure if I understand my question. And
No, I hear.
Christine's look is like, I don't understand your question.
No,
I understand your
I
question.
understand what you're saying. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to respond.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the thing is that,
I guess I think you can look at it. You can break it down into, free cash is your checking account, to be completely simplistic, and your stabilization is your savings account.
It's your money market that you only get 6 transfers a month, and then you get a nasty letter.
That's a good way of explaining it, I think.
Yeah.
I get
That's
it.
where I was going with it in my head too. Like, there's more restrictions on it, but it does good things for you, So like, if we have all of those reserves, it's going to help our bond rating. It's going to be better for us, and it's available for us to use, but it puts a little bit more strict thought around why you're using it.
okay, so I agree. I understand that piece. And I understand the mechanics, okay? I mean, when you talk about, okay, it's a 2/3 vote versus the 50-50 vote, which is fine.
And I think, Bob, maybe you're getting to like, so why are we telling people we want to transfer it? And I think my answer
No,
to
I'm
that-
not. Let me
No?
finish. I'm
Okay.
sorry, because I'm not,
Okay.
I'm really not, again, I'm sorry. I'm not being very articulate on this.
You're okay.
I'm just looking for what's the philosophy? The philosophy on the stabilization is don't spend it.
That's a long term.
Really, don't spend it, because if that's what is gonna be, supporting our bond rating, we don't want to, you don't spend it, right? Because you're not gonna, if you start seeing a stabilization going from 5 to 7 to 9 to you want consistency in that number, right? As costs increase, you want to keep building that stabilization. You want it basically to be 9.5%, or 7.5% forever.
Right. I
Right?
think,
You're never gonna
Bob,
say,
are-
oh, it's 7.5, but someday it'll be 5. It won't. It's always gonna be 7.5, right?
as of
Well-
right now, that's the minimum we're looking for.
Christine, what is that?
That's
what
the
is
policy.
What
I
does the
think
DOR recommend as a percent of your expenditures? They used to have, I forget what it was, but there used to be a recommended percent. Is it the 7.5?
Well, I think I think if you look at the DOR, they're looking at 9 to 12. I think that's what, is the overall goal, but there's
9 to
obviously some
12.
flexibility in that. I
That's
think
high.
when you think about, Bob, I think when you think about the stabilization being, it's an investment long-term. And I think when you have an issue such as a pandemic like we had, we made some significant cuts to that budget last year. If we had adequate reserves in stabilization that we had been building up, then we would have been able to make the decision whether or not we wanted to use some of that funding to help bridge that gap. If we hadn't had the CARES funding come in, we probably would have had to reach further into that stabilization. So I don't think it's something that you never touch. I think it's like your nest egg you don't want to touch unless you absolutely have to. Now, there are a lot of towns last year who did not have to make the changes that we made in the budget because they had adequate reserves. They had, been transferring a portion of their free cash every year into stabilization. So they built that up so that they weren't as crushed by a 10% reduction in that state aid like we were. They didn't have to cut the positions that we cut last year or cut the town's budget by 4%. So I think we need to think about it for the next time there's an issue.
Okay, but and going forward, again, it's the free cash is the preferred source of that kind of
Well, I think there are other things. Part of it, we have property that we're going to be looking to dispose of, whether that's a lease for the landfill, the Hinckley South property, not obviously this year, but when we talk about the Hinckley North in the next 2 years, that money will come in. And part of what's in the financial policy is that any money brought in from the sale of land be transferred into those stabilization funds.
Okay.
So if you're able,
all right. I actually,
what I'm getting?
but yeah, this is something that I think we talked about this in the past.
Mhm.
I think this is a conversation that we should have, and I'm not looking to spend more time, but I think it's needed I think it's a conversation that we should have from a town warrant finance perspective outside of the budget. In the sense that, because when you talk about, as you're explaining it, I understand, but when we talk about solar projects and the ability of proceeds from the sale of land, that's long-term planning as opposed to
Yeah.
the free cash, which that's to meet an immediate need. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like 3 different components. It's, you can always spend out of the stabilization, but it's going to cost you, right? Because if the number comes down, we're at 7.5, so that's our minimum. So we should have a plan to build up to the 9 to 12, which is what our policy is, right? I'm that's why I'm saying this is a broader conversation, but I'm just trying to understand it from Because, every year you don't want to do what we're doing, which is, okay, how do we get this? And, oh, we didn't see this coming. And we're getting better at this long-term planning. And I think this is a component. And then I'll go on mute. So I'm
Bob, I agree. I tend to agree. I think adding some clarity to the weight of these discussions is helpful, right? To understand why we're putting the significance on this for the long-term picture of the town, right? I think is what you're at.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is a long-term, and it's, I mean, hats off to the teams before and the selectmen and what have you for putting the capital budget in place, for having that, you've got the fiscal disciplines, Christine, that you've been you're able to respond. And there's a lot of pluses that go here. But, now we're having a little bit of an opportunity to manage this. And that was really my question. So what do we use free cash for? We don't want to use it to offset operating deficits. So what do we use it for?
Ideally, Bob, you don't have to use it for anything.
It's your long-term equity. It just stays put.
Well, that's what
It's
just
a one-time
stabilization,
windfall
long-term
that
equity?
just happens to be extra. Ideally, it's not used for anything.
Right?
Yeah, but okay, so so stabilization, isn't stabilization Newton equity? Isn't that really the equity?
It's a reserve, sure.
Yeah, I
but
mean,
that
that's
would be
the
your
that's
first-
the
your
equity you don't
first
want
source
to
for
touch. You
town.
don't want to sell your equity, right?
Right.
But the
So
free
you-
cash is something that's,
But the free cash, Bob, is part of that 4.9 million. That the new schedule that Christine passed out tonight.
Yeah.
That's the sum of the 2,190,000 and up top there, plus the 1,849,000, plus three other reserves that Nick told us about last week of 580, 150, and 176. I forget what they're labeled, but that brings you to the 4,949,000. Actually, I mean, all we're doing is moving money between free cash and the long-term account, the stabilization. The number on the spreadsheet last year with the last week with the total of 5,530,000 for total, that's still the same number. It's just the buckets are changing.
okay.
And I like Christine's way of explaining it. The free cash is your checking account and the rest is your savings. And I agree with Jeremy to the extent is that you should never be able to use it, but if you're going to use it, if you need money, that's the first place you go. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I would go to stabilization
Why is that?
because it's set up to manage the ups and downs of your tax receipts. So the financial policy says the goal of these reserve accounts is to permit the town to maintain its level of services during an economic downturn without seeking to burden taxpayers with a tax increase during times of economic distress.
So in
course.
other words, like it would have been available to us if there had not been things like the CARES Act that got passed
Right.
in order to get through. But because there was so much passed and funds that came to cover all of those extras, we didn't have to use it. But you never know, like next time there's a pandemic, maybe they won't do the CARES Act stuff again.
Right.
Which is another reason why you have it.
I think, Bob, let me send you, the DOR has a really good 2 or 3 page write-up, might be in the budget book from last year, regarding free cash and what they think you should use it on. So let me, as soon as this meeting's over, we'll send you a copy of that. It's a good.
You'll circulate it to everyone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, only Bob gets it.
And I think it's part of that. Again, I hopefully, because I find this conversation useful and I think the input from others is helping me as well. That, it's always interesting because, this is my 3rd year on the committee and it's interesting decisions I made based on what I didn't know the 1st and 2nd year,
We're in
so-
the same we're in the same boat, Bob.
so I think it's, as we go through this budget cycle, a little prelim on this, knowing what we're getting ourselves into and knowing what's available and trying to anticipate, in my judgment, is helpful. And it really, because the some of the questions that are coming up, because of the significant cost of the schools and what have you, they all fall into this. I mean, they're different. It's not easy to make the complex simple, but the more simple we can, I think the better off we are with Joe.
Boy, that warrant committee letter is going to be really, has to be this puts a premium on that warrant committee letter in the warrant.
Christian, I have a question. So if you were saying that the 3.5 or 4 million in free cash is a high amount, is there a certain amount that you think would be like adequate, that's not too low but not too high? Is there kind of like a sweet spot in the amount of free cash we should have?
I mean, I think you can look at what our budget history has been on free cash, and this year obviously being much higher than we normally have. I mean, we like having the turnbacks because it shows me that my departments aren't spending their budgets just to spend their budgets. So I think, there's a fine line between that though. You obviously don't want to overtax people and give people too big of a budget that they don't need. But we also don't want to completely restrict it and then get them in the policy of use it or lose it as well. So there's a fine line on the turnbacks. I don't know off the top of my head what the sweet spot would be for our budget for that.
Is it a 2.5%? Is it a 2.5?
I don't know what I would anticipate. I would hope to have back every year.
I mean, I want to remember that this is a budget that for the first time in 3 years we can have capital spending. So,
right. I mean,
it's really, and again, I don't want to understate the progress, but the fact is that as we built these accounts up, we should be doing it in a, again, I mean, I feel as one member of a warrant finance committee, I'd like to have a better understanding on that going in, and Christine and Nick, you do a great job in guiding us. So, I mean, it's not a question of not having information, but I guess I was a little, my curiosity, which is really what it was last week, was, well, let's put another 200,000 in there. I think it's more like, are we doing it because we can, or are we doing it because we should?
I think it's both.
Yeah, well, I think it should be the latter. I think it should be we're doing it because we should, because doing it if we can is just sort of, we're kind of doing what we did before, which is sort of go down the road and see what happens, and it's not that we're not doing that.
No.
There's a lot of thought that goes into it, and if we're the finance advisory piece of this, that's why I'm saying a little. That's why I had the question. That's all.
I think, Jeremy, I think you were the one who made the point last week or Thursday, or I don't know, I'm spending a lot more time with you people than my own family. So whenever we were last, I think Jeremy made the point that, it's not only making sure we build up our reserves. Moody's and other review agencies are looking to make sure we're following the financial policy, and they'll look favorable upon not only are we just meeting the minimum, but we're going a little extra. So putting that extra into stabilization will be a positive reflection on us during any of those reviews.
Yeah. No.
And last year, I mean, think about the growth we've had in the year. And part of that is because we've had, some outside assistance and federal stimulus, but we weren't able to do $200,000 to the stabilization account last year. We didn't do the OPEB contribution last year, and we didn't have a capital budget. So we are making really great strides as we move forward. And part of that is because we're working towards meeting the financial policy. it's giving us a little breathing room as we start to build those reserves up, which is what we should be hoping for.
I agree. And I'm just going to say one thing that, maybe it was because of my confusion, but I've gotten a lot of information and learning some things from everybody on the committee in this conversation that we don't always get. And I think it's part of it is because we've always been in such a reactive mode the last 3 years, you know, for a number of reasons. And my ending comment on this is I'd like to see the committee have more opportunities to have this kind of discussion, because I found it helpful. And it shows the value of, to be candid, it shows the value of the part of everybody in the committee, because there's some good ideas here that, I don't know, and perspectives that we don't all share. I mean, we come from different perspectives, and I think having that, you know, as I say, for lack of a better term than the philosophy, but we know we are, as you just said, Christine, we're getting into a position where we can do some planning, you know, and we can start to understand why stabilization versus free cash, even if it's just hey, because we want to build it and it's going to help us, and it shows the stability of the town and the like. So, I mean, I've learned from it, so I appreciate it. And now I will go on mute. No, just listen.
Bob, we echo your comments. Thank you.
Bob, I always say everything I think comes out of your mouth. So it's all good, because you have this way of saying it in a much nicer way than I do sometimes.
Well, I've always had a vision in my head about a purple Jeep. I don't know how it got there, but
See? Well, here, you want to see it again?
there you
There
go.
you go. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
But this is really, yeah, I don't know if this is continuing, but I do have a couple of questions on our revenue side when you come back, if we're
No,
okay.
we can go there. I mean, I think for the most part tonight, the only subject was this, and because I don't even think the other couple of articles that we had sitting out there were things that we could even do tonight. So really it was to finish this and hopefully end in voting on a budget, and then vote on Newton's minutes, and then hear your favorite motion as always. So.
Well, I don't want to set whatever the agenda is. I just wanted to throw out there a couple of
Well,
questions.
this is, no, why don't you go ahead and ask your questions? I mean, does anybody else have any more questions on free cash, or we can jump over to the other sheet that Christine and Nick put together, and they could just walk us through the budget, because I think I'd like to go through if people have any questions and whatnot, because I wasn't really thinking that we were going to vote on every line individually. I was thinking we could kind of do it as a package. So it might make sense to just walk through the budget one from top to bottom and answer people's questions. Does that work? Okay. All right, then I'm gonna, Nick, are you getting that job, or are we gonna make Christine do it?
And let me just pull it up and I'll share and as we go.
Sure.
Sorry, I was just checking on my dinner that's cooking.
How's it
That's
look?
all right, because while you were gone, I told Nick that he needed to run through the other spreadsheet.
Okay, perfect. I'm back.
So this was the worksheet we sent out last week. Actually, we sent the revised, obviously, version with the 2 changes today, but otherwise the same. On the revenue side, unchanged. And since our last conversations, property tax levy, 2.5 levy increase, new growth, all have been kind of status quo since the beginning of this conversation. Debt exclusions number is $3.3 million. That's based on the debt excluded debt on the books right now, slowly falling off. Obviously, a new school project, if approved, would change that scenario for fiscal 23. The building stabilization fund override, that's the override on the tax levy that goes to the municipal building stabilization fund. The selectmen approved a 2.5% increase on that from last year. On the other revenues, state aid, that's the number in Governor Baker's budget that he released in January. The House of Representatives budget will be out probably in a couple of weeks, so there might be slight reductions, but that is typical with the state budget process. They don't usually have a final one till May or June, once the House and the Senate and the governor agree. On the local receipt side, so obviously we've bumped that number up from last year. We had also revisited this recently, about a $98,000 increase from the number we had been carrying for a while. The only thing I'll just flag on local receipts, some of our receipts are just declining over time as expected. So we may not get it back to where it had been in recent years, but we'll keep an eye on that as we prep for fiscal 23. Anticipated declines due to some special assessments on properties and other items. Other available general funds, this number is one that has flipped around a lot, but that's because it's where we have to show, basically to show our work for the Department of Revenue for where some money is coming out of available funds. So coming out of that is some money for a capital stabilization fund. The fund right below it, the building stabilization fund, as an available fund, again, is similar. It's the money coming out of some of these stabilization funds and some of our revolving funds that when we submit all of our documents to DOR, this is how it shows up. In terms of other revolving funds, in the ALS revolving fund, some slight changes there as we are taking some additional funds this year for the ambulance purchase out of the ALS revolving fund, and Parks and Rec revolving fund has some capital as well.
So Nick, these are taking money out of funds, because the one on the ALS was a question I had. That's using funds, but are we getting more revenue for ALS, or is there a correlation there?
Yeah, it's both sides. So there's a $150,000 offset to the operating budget. In addition to that, there is some capital being used out of the ALS revolving fund, but our revenues have increased on the ALS side since the town has gone to ALS. But something we still need to get another year of experience would be helpful, just to kind of figure that out. And that gets back to our local receipts discussion. So this might be too much information, but our ambulance receipts goes to local receipts. And so ALS goes directly to the ALS revolving fund. And then our basic life support funding, some goes to the ambulance revolving fund and some goes into local receipts. So as we've done more ALS, the amount of ambulance receipts going to local receipts has shifted. So it's a little bit of a shift, but at the same time, we're seeing higher receipts than we have seen in a couple of recent years. So,
I mean,
and Bob, on some of the earlier versions, this number was not 400, it was less. And part of the reason why it's so much bigger is because there has been so much more income going into that they've seen over the course of the year. The largest piece of this 400 is buying an ambulance outright.
Right. Well, but I guess my point is reflecting back on the early days when the ALS was being proposed and voted on. It was very contentious and seen as being kind of a cost generator, and it looks like it's been a really good for the town. Am I reading it right, or is it?
I think you're reading it right. I think that this year they really have started to see more income in it. Yeah.
Which is, I mean, we don't want to see increased income because obviously we don't want to see anybody taking the ambulance. So we're trying to balance, saying.
Well, but the point is that before they're going to take the ambulance, whether it's ours or it's coming from Norwood. So it's not like we're not making people sick so we can get the ambulance to them.
I just don't like celebrating that we're making money.
I mean, seriously, the idea is the alternative was paying for the services. But we have a team and it's a service that's being provided and it's being used.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're a lot less reliant on other towns now.
Right.
And we want to show that to show that we're putting those revenues to use. And that's how we're doing it through the capital and by also offsetting the operating.
Yeah, because I think a lot of thought went into this, and don't give credit where credit's due, I guess is my point. Okay.
I apologize if you've already explained this. What is the reason for the reduction in the local receipts or that trend?
So that is incorporating a little bit of, I just discussed with ambulance receipts where the buckets are shifting
Yeah.
a bit, so that's an impact. We had a bunch of, and the phrase is blanking me, sewer betterments, excuse me, that it's a lot of them are 20 to 30 year betterments. And so those are declining over time. A lot of them have been paid off. So that's a local receipt that has declined for the last 20 years. So a few of those are just kind of starting to shift. So just wanted to flag that for future consideration.
Okay.
And I think that one of the biggest dips last year was us cutting it because we were afraid of COVID and what it was doing to things like the meals tax, right?
Correct.
And all of that, yeah.
The biggest component of the local receipts, about $2 million a year, is motor vehicle excise. So if people aren't buying new cars, then that has a knock-on effect for future years as the depreciation and everything else. And the next few lines are free cash transfers. So it's a stabilization fund, to the OPEB trust, to the general stabilization. And then the last line is the enterprise fund offset. So that is based on the allocated costs that we do to the water and sewer enterprise funds for employee salaries, employee benefits, Christine's salary, my salary, other employees in town who do some work on enterprise fund activities. In addition, the big jump obviously is the water treatment plant project. Incorporates the general fund, pays their debt, they pay us back for the debt. So the big jump is really due to a $12 million anticipated bond there. And there's also a smaller issuance this year for a project that was approved a couple of years ago to do a maintenance project at the Mount Nebo water tower. So 2 debt issuances anticipated this year for the water enterprise fund, which is causing that big jump from last year.
So Nick,
Go ahead, Newton, sorry.
yes, being responsible for water and sewer enterprise funds, is that 2.5 million final, or is it still to be refined?
The $2.5 million number should not go anywhere from there. If it does, I'll let you know.
Okay, so can
The only thing that would cause it to change at this point would be, I don't anticipate any changes.
So how close then is the article to being finalized, the warrant article for enterprise funds?
Should have that in a day or two, I'd say.
Okay,
So again, I'm going to ask the stupid question because I'm not sure if I understand it. When you see receipts going up by almost $1 million for water and sewer, that's a contribution from the water and sewer department to the town?
The reason for the increase is because we book the principal and interest payments in the town's general fund principal and interest line. So those numbers are also having a big increase. So there's no net gain to the operating budget. It's just charging them for their principal and interest costs.
It's really the water and sewer ratepayers, Bob, that are paying that amount. And the water and sewer board is actually forecasted into their rate setting to accommodate for these projects. So there's not going to be some big increase year over year. They've kind of been anticipating this so that in their available funds, that money is available to transfer to the general fund. But it's you and I using water and using the sewer
No, I
system.
know. I've seen the increase in the bill. Yeah, I recognize. I'm Joe the taxpayer in that regard, no question. But how does this fit into the water and sewer treatment plant? And the 12 million that's in the article now.
So
That's the debt service costs.
right, anticipated for the first year for the treatment plant plus maybe Nebo's debt?
Yeah, it's a $12 million. We have projected a $12 million debt issuance over a 20-year amortization at 3%, and that have booked that into their projections for next year. That's what they've been carrying. In addition to that is about a $210,000 5-year issuance to cover the remaining costs for the Mount Nebo water tower project. So combined, that's getting us to about a $960,000, $980,000 increase over the prior year.
And that was when, as I recall, when they made their presentation, they talked about that big jump
Yes.
this year, and then it's leveling off going forward on that new adjusted base, right? Is that it?
Yeah, the next few years, right now in their projections, I believe, are between 5% and 4% for 2 years, and then back down to 3% a year.
In the rates, that's right. I think that's right. Yep.
So I guess, so this year's expenses and contribution anticipates that the $12 million bond will be approved.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we wanted to show, you know,
It's kind of a catch-22, Bob. You kind of have
Well, no,
to.
but it's interesting because, you know, going through in the article, it's like, well, maybe we won't vote on it, but you have.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of times this budget, a lot of times when we go through this, the budget is done assuming that every single thing passes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's why free cash is always the last, because then they have to end up making an adjustment because we will have approved an operating budget, assuming everything passes. But then when you have a free cash plug in there, that's the piece that gets adjusted at the end, because worst case scenario is every single thing passes. Even if the warrant committee has voted to not pass everything, we have to budget it if the town disagrees with us.
So when you make the presentation for the article on the water treatment plant, does it stated that it's anticipated or that the costs are included in the budget, or do we not, did we speak to that?
so
I don't know.
it's not so much that the costs are included in the budget. I think the key question is whether the costs are included in their rate estimates. So let's play that out. If the project does not get approved, what would happen to the general fund budget is it would be reduced by $960,000, which is the principal and interest for year one. Enterprise fund budget would be reduced by $960,000, which they would be paying us. And then the enterprise fund would have to, evaluate what to do, but also they would have much higher revenue than expected because of they had expected to spend nearly $1 million. So
Right.
that would be
Nice description, Nick. That was great.
Yeah.
Spot on.
And all that free cash is the enterprise funds, not the general fund. That correct, Nick?
Yes. Yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you. Never too old to learn.
Are you saying we taught an old dog a new trick?
No, I'm just saying I'm old and it takes me longer to learn than it used to. And I am an old.
So that's their, I don't know, Christine, did you want to go through the budgets or?
Well, we talked about this last week. Does anybody have any specific questions, or do you want to go? The only real changes that you would have seen in these is the 2% that we took from the HR budget and reallocated to individual budgets. My new contract is now included in here. The police chief's contract extension is included in here. So those are the major changes that you would have seen. But if we have any specific questions on the line item, I'm more than happy to take them. I just don't know if you want to go line by line through them.
Do you think that health insurance reduction will come back in full force next year, or is?
I think so. I mean, we definitely won't have the health insurance monthly, holiday premium they're giving us. So you can count on that at a minimum. And then we're closely following the trends for what we anticipate for health insurance as we emerge from COVID.
Because that's a big number, huh?
Very. And that's all town employees, school and town. That's for everybody.
I mean, it's interesting because you're just looking at this and already looking ahead. It's like, oh, that's $300,000 we're going to get back before anything else even happens, huh?
Before we even get an increase, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
exactly.
That's
Yeah.
exactly how we want you to look at that.
I've never seen a health
Yeah,
insurance.
why should you suffer alone, huh, Christine? You want us all to have to share your agony and the anxiety. Okay. How's dinner?
Great. We're having chicken wings. It's the basketball finals tonight.
I know we better be
That's
off.
right. Don't worry. We're going to be off of here in time.
I'm gonna check out before I have to.
We're going to be off of here just in time.
Okay.
If nobody else has any serious questions, can we use the extra free cash that we're not using to give the warrant committee a budget again so that we could have a party?
No.
At least I asked. I think we deserve a party.
Can I ask a couple of definitional questions
Sure.
of Nick or Christine? To the last page, I think second to last page, reserve fund, 150K. Is that to cover reserve fund transfers?
Correct.
Okay, so budget is, they miss it by some extraordinary amount or for some extraordinary event, and this will help cover that in the immediate term, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
You just approved one last week.
And
Yep.
you're reminding me I haven't stopped by to sign that thing in triplicate yet so that
Yep.
Nick can be all excited when he gets to rip the
I don't think I have.
paper apart. Nick's like, that is going to be the last time that happens. I tell you, people.
So back to the free cash usage and balance, Nick, when that 4.949 million was put together, is this the 150 that's part of the, loose change, so to speak, to bring that up to that 4.9 million?
Yes.
Okay. And of course, you cited the MSBA reserve as being the other amount for about 583.5 thousand. And then there was a reserve, another reserve for about 176,000. I'm sorry to go back to free cash. What is that and where is it?
It's
Is it bond
basically
premium?
it's interest earned on the big MSBA payment to the town. So when
Okay.
the MSBA reimbursed us from the early 2000 school projects, they gave the town a chunk of money that was put away in an account and it earned interest over that lifespan. As it's paid off, obviously, it's been reduced over time. And that fund has been used at least once before for another MSBA project, a boiler project, I believe at Wheelock School. So that was used, and then the reimbursements from that project went back into that fund. But it's about 176,000, and don't anticipate to add too much to it in the next year or two. And then it's reserved for appropriation by the town.
Yep.
So Nick, in those cases where there's like 3 years left on these, on that school debt, right? So those numbers will go away in the next 2 or 3 years?
It won't increase. That $176,000 figure might increase slightly for any additional earnings, but I wouldn't expect a substantial increase. And then it'll not close out until it is voted to somewhere by the town. It's reserved for appropriation by the town right now. So it'll stay a reserve until it's applied to a project or closed out to stabilization or however the town so votes.
And how about the 580?
That will be used to offset the principal and interest payments on those school projects in fiscal 23.
What's it called again? How did you label that 583?
The MSBA reimbursement account balance. I think it's had a few different names over time.
But again, but when that debt ends in 2 or 3 years, when does that end?
It all falls off in fiscal 23. That'll be the last year those debt payments are made on those school projects.
So the reimbursement ends in fiscal 23 as well.
Correct. Yes, to not get into it, but yes, that's the best way to look at it. They rather than pay us over time, the MSBA wrote a big check some time ago that is drawn down over time in accordance with DOR.
So how does the 176 continue?
It's earning interest, so it'll continue to earn that, but those will be the only real earnings you see in that account.
And that won't go away in 23?
Nope, because it's money the town already has. It's separate from all that. It's just, not describing it well, but it's basically revenue on the reimbursement from the MSBA held separately and reserved to be appropriated separately from the rest.
Once it's used though, it's gone, Bob. It's not like, there's not like a principal amount that's keeping, you know, earning
Yeah,
interest.
yeah, right. Okay.
And so for the new Dale Street School, for instance, if when that comes up and is borrowed, is that dispersed in a different way than it was in the past?
Yeah, so those early 2000s school projects are under the old system, and the MSBA, when it was created, they try to clean their books. So the new MSBA system, as we write checks to the contractors working for the town, they reimburse the town. So what would be an $80 million project, the town will only have to issue debt for its share of the cost. We won't have to issue $80 million worth of debt. We only have to do whatever the number ends up being, because they'll pay us as we go.
So there won't be, in the future, the Dale Street School is not going to add to our reserves by the nature of the accounting method. It's a
Right.
different system going forward.
Right.
Just a point of information.
Yeah.
Another reason why it's important to do the bigger stabilization transfer now.
Right. So we got, this is fiscal 23, 580. And then we'll have fiscal 23, 580. And that's real cash going into our money market account. Is that right?
No,
No?
It's there already.
it's already there. It goes away because it gets paid down. Like that one, that in particular line is dwindling.
So
In fact, on your schedule, at least in the financial book you prepared as of February 3rd, 2020, this is obviously dated, it rolled off. There's 0 in 23 and 24
Right.
for the MSB lump sum reimbursement reserve balance. It's gone after 22.
Right.
So basically, when the MSBA, which was the school building authority before it became the MSBA, wanted to close out their books, Bob, they gave us all of our money in a lump sum. But the problem we had to worry about was it was subject to arbitrage, and we had to come up with an agreement with the DOR so that, because we couldn't take all that money at once and spend it. So we had to come up with an account, basically almost like a repayment of that money to ourselves on that, so that we didn't use all of it in the first year or hold on to it till the end. There was an agreement as to how it would have a declining balance.
I have one more definitional question on that page, overlay for 200,000.
That's money set aside in control of the Board of Assessors for tax abatements and other.
Okay.
issues.
It includes the tax abatements, and it also includes, that's where we pay the senior tax work-off program from as well.
Ah,
In the past, we've offset some of the general fund with excess overlay that the assessors released back to the town. So that is something that may come up in the future. And it also pays for exemptions on property tax bills.
so there could be a turn back. Is that what you're saying? No,
Potentially
not-
at some potential future year.
Yeah.
Once it goes into overlay, it stays there until it's specifically taken out. So it's
They-
not like
they
a turn back to free cash. It
Okay.
stays
Yeah.
in overlay until it's assigned.
They would vote to release it to us if they thought they had an excess amount in there. I don't think it was last year's budget. Yvonne's going to kill me for not remembering, but it the year before, the assessors, I think it was close to 100,000 they released to us because they had enough on hand.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions on the budget, or do you feel comfortable to?
Well, there's one more page.
Oh, sorry. Let's go to the next page.
we have
So
any-
Bob, this page kind of gets to the point of, this is where you assume everything passes. Monetary outcome.
Mhm.
Do you guys have any questions on these? I know it can get confusing, especially when you get to the transfers in and out of the building stabilization fund.
Yeah.
You've had to
These are all
explain that
warrant
one to
article
me
amounts,
about
right?
20 times.
Transfer in and transfer out are both positive numbers. That's what gets confusing.
Yeah,
That gets,
it's confusing. I finally have just gotten to the point that I just say, okay, Nick, I trust you.
Believe me, none of my questions are not ones of trust. They're ones of ignorance on my part. They're certainly not lack of trust in Christine and Nick, that's for sure. What are the major monetary articles? I should know that probably, but I don't. Does that include, do we still have is the hospital site 100,000 in there, or that's not in there anymore, right?
No, that's in the highway budget now. The three that are still carried there, the primary one is the money for the Medfield TV. The second one is the cemetery perpetual care. That's just a transfer right over to the perpetual care of about 58,000. The Medfield TV number right now is about 206,000. And then the last small one that's where the Uber and Lyft is booked. So
I'm going to call you an Uber Bob so we can up that number.
I'm an Uber, okay. Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions on this page?
This should all tie to our articles, the numbers in our articles, correct?
Correct.
That
That's
we've
correct.
diligently pursued and
That's
researched.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I'm good.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, I think that I can either make the motion or not, but I would move to accept this budget with the one change of increasing stabilization to a line of 700 rather than 500 and the associated changes because of that.
I'll second that motion.
Can I just ask a question? So are
Of
we
course you
voting
can.
on the operating?
The
budget
operating
article?
budget article, yes, I would say yes, that's what we're doing.
Okay,
As presented with the one change of increasing the stabilization transfer to 700 rather than 500 is the motion on the table, made by me, seconded by Jeremy. People feel good to vote?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. Amanda,
Yes.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Christine,
Yes,
Newton,
yes.
Ed,
yes,
Bob,
Yes.
Sharon is a yes. Congratulations, it's April 5th. And we have hopefully
Thank you,
balanced a
Christine.
budget that the selectmen will not yell at us about tomorrow. Fingers crossed.
Oh,
I think we're
So
gonna
that
do it.
Christine can go to print.
I need to go to print. I think we're gonna.
Is there anything else that we haven't voted on yet that we could vote on tonight? Or
I don't
I don't
so.
think there
we-
is. I just
no,
wanted to
think
double
you're
check.
You're waiting on water and sewer, you're waiting on citizens petitions, and you have a few others that you may have to be heard at town meeting.
Okay. And so in regards to citizens petitions, is this just a reminder to send Bob questions? I know that I think he and I have both sent a few over to Mike, but if you guys have any more, Mike and Tim Bonifati are both coming on Monday. So Monday will just be a elementary school extravaganza meeting. And then if there are any other articles we can vote on, we can do that on Monday too.
Yeah, anything in the next day or two is fine. I'll get them over. I'll get them over to Tim and Mike probably Thursday morning or Wednesday night. So
Thank you, Bob.
I think
And I
that
feel like,
TV interview answered a lot of questions.
yeah, and I think that it's important, I think, to recognize two things, and you'll see this in the questioning, but I mean, Mike and Tim are extremely knowledgeable and experienced. You know, our objective is to understand the issues relating to this town, that this proposed article is, right? On the vote at the town meeting. There is a lot still to be done between now and June when they do the final numbers. So, and a lot has to be communicated between now and September for the special town meeting. Okay, so it's June is when the numbers need to be going to the MSBA for the refined. So the questions that are being asked, I think, are twofold. One is all of the questions are very helpful for Mike and Tim and the committee, to anticipate what's on people's minds. So that's one is very helpful. But I think that it's important from my perspective on the Warrant Committee that we're trying to get enough information to understand whether or not there is real risk in taking this decision to go to Wheelock and put it back to the town or put it back to the committee. You know, that's really what the article is that's before us, right? The is saying do two things. One is we want you to look at this again. And two, we want you to go back to the MSBA and change and use the current actual population of enrollment as the basis for the school building. So again, I mean, we're going to have questions throughout, and I'm not trying to change anything because I think that even if they're not to be answered right now, it's very helpful to have it. Tim Bonifanti and I worked on this thing 20 years ago, and he said to me, this is going to be as tough as it was 20 years ago. I hope not. I think the nature of any kind of a school project is always like this. But what is the biggest difference now is that there's more advanced communication than certainly was evident 20 years ago. And that's kind of what happened. They were kind of caught off guard. And a lot of blood was spilled on both sides as a result of that. So I don't want that. We can't let that happen again. But in terms of this particular Monday, I think the first priority is to understand if there is merit or risk to going back and saying, no, we need to revisit the Dale Street decision. And that is to move to the Wheelock campus. And if there is risk in that, how do we assess it? And I think that's what the warrant article will be an up or down on, at least in my judgment. But all the other questions are really important for the next 6 months as well. So I wouldn't discourage you from asking the questions. I guess, so what I just said, I'm actually framing it in a question. Does that make sense as to what we should be addressing next Monday? Or answering on an up and down? Yeah, we think you should go back and review this because there's enough uncertainty and we'll take the risk.
I get, that's how I see it. Yeah.
Because if you saw the video, Mike did address that risk. He said one of three things can happen. if it's a close vote, the MSBA might let you take another look at it, which is what happened 20 years ago. The vote was like less than 2% differential, so we did get to quote revote, to the consternation of many. And the other is you could go back and say, we're going to recess the whole thing. May have to spend another big piece like the $1 million and put it at Dale Street, or you go it alone without the MSBA.
Mhm.
And you build your own school with your own money, and you don't take that 17 million. Say, no, thanks. We're gonna build a school based upon the current population. We're not gonna use MSBA standards, and we don't need your money. I'm sorry, I'm showing my bias.
You a little bit.
No, I think.
Okay, you're allowed. All right. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Do we want to do Newton's minutes, or does anybody else want to? Or we can put a pin in elementary school till next week.
Happy to do the minutes. Christine,
We can do the minutes because
didn't
tip off
anticipate
of this
this when she
game
put
for
the
people
dinner
that
in.
care to watch is at 9.
Yeah, but she didn't anticipate this when she put the dinner in. It was like,
I know. And Christine wants to
really,
eat.
Bob? Do you really have to ask that now?
Totally fine. It was not dinner for me. It was dinner for my family.
Yeah.
I'm all
Okay,
good.
so you can blame it on me. That's the guy. That guy there. Okay.
Funny.
I promise when we get to the annual warrant committee party again, I will make my infamous chicken wings.
There we go. Nice.
Move that we approve the minutes of April 1st as submitted.
Second.
I'm just sad that they didn't have any April Fool's jokes in them.
Hey,
All right.
He was good enough to leave those out.
Right. Okay. So, Amanda,
Yes, approved.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Christine,
Yes,
Newton,
yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Ed,
Yes.
and I am also a yes. So unless there's anything else more exciting than the fact that tonight my Alice was Nick rather than Christine, shook it up a little bit. Does anybody else have anything else they want to talk about tonight, or else we can meet again next Monday?
That's your cue,
Alright.
Bob.
Oh, move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second,
Ed,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Newton,
yes.
Christine,
yes.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Amanda.
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. And I think for forevermore, Bob is the only one that's ever allowed to move to adjourn. So if you ever don't come to a meeting, like, we're going to be
Oh.
stuck here in limbo forever.
Go on for days.
I would delegate that to anyone who wants to fill it.
All right. So everyone have a good week, and I'll see you on Monday.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
night.
guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Good night.